Okay, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to Dreamforce. Thanks so much for joining us today. Is this everyone's first session? We're pretty close to it, yeah? A few of you have probably snuck into an earlier one. Great. So this is developing admin-friendly components with for the app builder. And we are the Lightning App Builder team. My name is Michael Gonzalez, and I'm the product manager for the team. Been at Salesforce for 3 years, been working exclusively in Lightning for all that time, so might have aged a little fast over the past few years. If any of you are Lightning developers out there, you might be able to relate. And I brought a couple developers for my team.
Hey, my name is Adeep Varatharajan. I'm the tech lead for Lightning App Builder.
And hi, I'm Christian Olsson. I'm a lead engineer on the App Builder team.
So forward-looking statement slide, you're going to see this in a lot of presentations here at Dreamforce. We are going to talk about the roadmap for the developer area for components that show up in the app builder. So please make any and all purchase decisions based on what's generally available today and not on the forward-looking things we're going to look at the roadmap later. So the agenda, I'm going to go into a little bit of background of why I think the session's pretty important, why I'm glad you're all here with me this morning. We'll talk a bit about styling guidelines, about design time configuration. That's configuration that occurs in the app builder. We'll talk about what's new in Winter 18. So we've got a great new feature we're going to share with you, go in a little bit in depth into. We're going to talk about authoring custom page templates, the developer roadmap, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. If we run out of time for that, we'll stick around for a few minutes. Feel free to come up and ask us any questions and get some one-on-one time with us. So the session's pretty important. Like admins, they use the app builder to customize pages. And they're able to do this without having to touch any code. So admins, I know many of them, I've talked to many of them. They're all pretty awesome. They've given us a lot of great feedback on this tool. And the thing that they love about it is that they can go in and make UI customizations to Lightning Experience without having to write any code or bring a developer in. So they can do things, drag and drop to change up the interface. They can put the details and related information right where it needs to be. They can do things like that. They can build their own home pages, their own record pages, and their own app pages as well. They can even discover components directly in the app builder from the app exchange. So they can click in an area where it brings up the app exchange, brings up an experience that's embedded in the builder itself, and they can add more functionality to their pages directly from the app exchange pretty easily. And then as of the Winter 18 release, they can create dynamic experiences. So this is something we're pretty happy that we delivered in Winter 18. This is just allowing admins to be able to create experience based on the record data. So imagine that if they're on an opportunity page, they want to create a rule on a component to say, show me when the opportunity value is over $100,000. They can put that logic into it. They don't have to bring a developer in to do it. They can build that all with the builder tool. So a little bit more background. So the Lightning pages is the area below the main navigation bar. And that's what we call Lightning page. And that's the areas that the admins are going in and interacting with when they're making these customizations. Each one of these Lightning pages, they include a template. And the template defines the base UX architecture for the page. So in the example that I have here, I've got a header up on top. I've got a body on the left, sidebar on the right. So it's just a header and two-column template, pretty standard web type layout that you see in a lot of different places. And within the template go the components. So the components is really where the magic happens. That's where admins, they can go in, drag and drop components into different areas of the page. They can rearrange them. They can update their properties. And components can really do a lot of great things. They can do everything from visualize data to kick off flows to even present a chatter feed. So there's a lot of flexibility in what components can do. And the admins are able to go in, bring it all together in the app builder to make the customizations with these components that they need for their end users. As I mentioned, there are three types of Lightning pages. There are record pages, so admins can go in to the app builder and they can customize both the standard and object record detail pages. They can customize the home page, which is that initial landing page that users see when they go into Lightning Experience for the first time. And they can also create and customize app pages, which is basically adding net new pages to the navigation menu. And these, you can kind of think of them as a blank template, and you can add, it's a great way of getting Lightning components into different areas of your navigation pretty easily. And for the developers out there, in order to make your components work with these page types, there's a couple of interfaces that just slid in down on the bottom that you declare, and you add to your components. So Flexipage available for record page for the record page use case, Flexipage available for desktop for home, and Flexipage available for all page types for the app page.
All right, so we've been taking a look at slides for a bit here. Let's quickly switch over to a demo, because we like looking at code, right? So Christian and I built this component. It's essentially a countdown component where you can pass in the ID of an event, and it'll sort of go pick up the subject, bring in an image, and sort of count down to it. So you can see in this case, we've passed in the ID of the Dreamfest event, which is in a day and 9 hours. We've been testing this a bunch. We've tested out the logic. We've styled it. And at this point, we think it's ready for us to expose for use by admins. So how do we do that? Like Michael mentioned, it's as simple as getting your component to implement an interface. Let's go ahead and do that. We've got this component here in the dev console, and we are implementing Flexipage available for all page types. That essentially tells the system that this component should be made available for all pages that are editable in the app builder. We hit save and switch to the app builder. So initially, this component wasn't exposed for use, and you can see it doesn't show up in the list of custom components there in the palette. Let's go ahead and hit refresh. And now it shows up. So you can see how easy it was. It was just as simple as adding an interface, and now the component shows up here. And there's nothing, and you can drag it on. The admin can drag it onto the page, and it should just render fine. Except it doesn't. You can see that it shows up, and it's rendering the information, so it's sort of working, but it has clearly broken the layout of the page. Let's switch back to the dev console and see what's going on over there. Let's switch to the CSS. All right, so that rule is probably what's wrong. Like, we've hard-coded the width to 1,500 pixels, which is less than ideal because this component can get dragged onto any region on the page, right? And regions can be wide, narrow, different sizes. You want to make sure you don't hard-code the width and break the layout. So let's switch this out and specify the width to be 100%. This is essentially telling the component that it needs to take up the width that is made available to it by its container, the region. We've saved that. Go to the app builder and refresh. And sometime soon, this should load up.
It's very slow.
No. This is where we just blame the Wi-Fi.
Yeah. Oh, there. Don't read on.
There we
It
go.
is the Wi-Fi.
All right, there. You can see now that with that simple change, the component looks a lot better. The page looks a lot better. And if we try and drag the component onto a narrow region, we've made it so that it adapts to that width and doesn't break the layout of the page. So while we're at this, let's switch back to some slides and go through some guidelines that we have in place for styling. The first one is around the width, and this is basically what we just saw. You want to make sure that your component takes up the space that is made available to it by its container. You don't want it to take up too much space, or it's going to break the layout like you just saw. You don't want it to take up too little space. You don't want to hard code a really small width, because that would then mean that components below it reflow up and, again, break the layout. So general rule of thumb is to stay away from absolute values, at least for the root element. That way you can be sure that the page is going to look fine, and regardless of what region your component is added to. The next I want to talk about is spacing. Now, as you know, components can come in from various different sources. You've got the components that we as Salesforce ship as a part of the out-of-the-box experience. You can see that on the palette on the left. In addition to that, there are all the components that you build as developers within your org. These are the custom components. And there are also a whole bunch of components that can be installed from the App Exchange. This essentially means that when the admin goes in to customize a page, there's components coming in built from various different developers. And at this point, it's impossible to coordinate how these components sort of behave when they are placed next to each other. So in order to sort of address this, we decided that we'd make sure that the framework adds in the spacing between components. This way the page looks consistent. There's consistent spacing between all the different components, and it makes for a consistent UI. But this does mean that if you add spacing around your component, you're going to see a lot of white space. And that's going to make the page look broken, sort of like you can see in this example over there. So We recommend you avoid adding paddings or margins around the root element of your component. If you really need to, padding is OK because it doesn't increase the effective width of your component. But if you add margins, it is going to affect it, and that is going to break the layout. So something to keep in mind and stay away from or avoid if possible. Now, the next is removing elements from the document flow, and this is probably one of the most important ones. You want to stay away from rules such as floats and position absolutes. And the reason for this is it sort of removes these elements from the flow of the document. And that is bad because that might mean that these elements either overlap other components or they cause components from below this, they cause other components that are below your component to sort of flow up and either overlap your component or get overlapped. Again, results in a broken layout and your page looks less than ideal. Now, wrapping components in cards. As many of you must have noticed, in Winter 18, we rolled out a new theme in Salesforce. You'll notice there's a blue background or gray-blue. And as a part of this effort, we also made sure all components were wrapped in cards. And in order to make sure your component is consistent with the rest of the UI, we recommend you wrap them in cards, and it's easy to do that. You just need to use the SLDS card CSS class on your component, and it'll make sure that wraps it in a card. This is important in addition to making, in addition to making the UI consistent. It also makes sure your component is future-proof. What I mean by that is when we do evolve our UI in the future, we'll make sure that all the components, we evolve the CSS class mentioned here, SLDS card. And so when we come up with a different color scheme or whatever, we'll make sure your component is also upgraded along with that. So it helps in making sure your component doesn't break with Salesforce upgrades. And the last one we have is related to adapting to the width of the region. Now, I mentioned earlier that it's always preferable to have your component use or have a width of 100%. But in a lot of cases, in real life, that's not all you need. Like, everything you need cannot just be solved in CSS, and you might need hold of some information about the region in your component, so you can either tweak the markup or tweak something in JavaScript. And this is why we expose this component called Lightning Flexipage Region Info. And this is really a simple component. All it does is provides you the width of the region that your component is placed in. And these aren't pixel values, but these are sort of approximate values. And here are the available values: small, medium, large, and extra large. And using these, you can either tweak the markup like we have in this example here, or access this in JavaScript and change the behavior of the component.
All right. So now when we've been following all these styling guidelines and our component looks and behaves very good for our end users in runtime, let's take a look at what we can do to improve, to make this more configurable for our admins using our declarative tools like App Builder. So if you developed Lightning components before, you're familiar with the Lightning component bundle. You have the component with your markup, the controller, helper, render, where you put your JavaScript logic. So while that defines how this component behaves at runtime, right now, let's focus on the design and SVG resources, which are there to enhance the design time experience of this component in our builder tools. So let's switch to App Builder again and work with this super fast Wi-Fi. So on the left, you see what we call the component palette. This is where we list all the components available for the admin to pull on the page. On the top of the list here, you have all the standard components that we ship out of the box from Salesforce. You can see they all have their own unique icon and a nice label, and they even have a description in their tooltip that further describe. It would show up. Maybe you have to click into it.
I don't know. Trust us, it's there.
All right. But let's take a look at our custom component we just exposed on the bottom there. As you can see, it has the default Lightning icon. And we're just showing the component the name as the label, the developer name here. So let's make this a little bit better. So let's go back to the dev console. And we'll start by adding a description to this component. So by using the description attribute on the Aura component. You may already have this in your component if you've been following the developing components before. So we're basically using the same in the builder. Next, we'll add a design resource. So this is where you declare additional design time metadata about your component. So let's add a label to the root element here. So you see we added a label here, and we have our own custom label. Third, when we're in here, let's go and go to the SVG and add our own custom icon. So let's replace the default lightning icon here. And we have a nicer one here we got from our designer. So let's save that, and let's go back and take a look at how that looks like. So let's refresh our palette. Oh, that was fast. And there we go. Now we have a nice icon that better represents what our component does. We have our label, and let's see if we can see the description here. No. It's there. It's in the tooltip, so that's a way to have additional information about what the component would do. Seems to be the presentation. OK, so let's go back to the slides and just briefly talk through what we just did. So the design resource, as we saw, is where you declare additional design time metadata about your component. That means additional metadata that's used by our declarative tools like Lightning App Builder, Community Builder, and other parts of setup. This is where you declare additional sort of metadata and or behavior of your component. For example, if you want to expose additional things for the admin that the admin can configure on your component. We have a demo coming up on that. One more thing. I just want to mention that we recently revamped our help doc around design resources. So I encourage you to take a look, and if you're not familiar with all the details, it's part of the Lightning Component Developers Guide. And the other thing we used was the SVG resource, which, as you saw, we pull in and use as an icon in our palette in this case. This is a great way for you to sort of showcase what your component is about and make it stand out in the palette. So let's go back to App Builder again. So let's drag this component onto the page. So as Adip mentioned earlier, this is a component that pulls in an event in our org and surfaces some data about that event. Right now, you can see it's hard-coded to Dreamfest. Let's make this configurable for the admin. So in the right-hand side here is what we call the property editor. This is where each component can expose properties that can be configured by the admin here. So let's do that. Let's go to our developer console. We'll go to the design resource. And we'll add a design attribute tag. So this is how you expose attributes of your components. You can see the name here, name event ID. This matches an attribute on the actual component. So you may have a lot of attributes on your component. This is how you control what attributes you want configured by the admin in the builder. So you see we have other attributes here, but we're only exposing event ID here. And same here, we can provide a label as well as a description about this. So let's save this and take a look how that looks like in the builder. We'll refresh the property editor. And there we go. Now we have the event attribute exposed here with our label. We even have an info bubble where we have that description. So you can use this if you need to provide additional information how to configure this attribute. However, as you can see, this attribute is a string. So we're showing the string editor here. This is not very user-friendly for the admin. He has to go and figure out what event he wants to show, find the event ID, and copy-paste it in here. So let's go and make some improvements to this. So by using our feature called dynamic Picklist, we'll add a data source to this attribute. So remember, this was just a string attribute. We're pointing to an Apex data source here. So let's go and look at that Apex class. So this is just an Apex class that extends an abstract class that we have, and you get a few methods you can implement here. The main one I want to point to is the getValues one. So this is where you can dynamically return a list of values that you want the admin to be able to configure for this attribute. So in this case, we're querying the event object, and we're for all the future events in the system and returning those in that list. So let's go and take a look at how this looks like in App Builder. So just like that, we got a nice pick list, dynamically populated by all the future events in our system. Mm-hmm. So let's go and pick. I know we're all excited about Dreamfest, so let's go and pick that. So there you go. It automatically refreshes in the canvas there. And now for sure we won't miss Dreamfest coming up tomorrow. So let's go back to slides. So what we just saw, we added the design attribute to our design file. So this is part of the additional design time metadata that's used by our declarative tools like App Builder to know what you want exposed and configurable on your component. We set the label, we added the description. You can do other things like specifying default values, which will be used the first time the component is dragged on the page. For example, for integer and strings, you can specify mean and max values. So if you have an integer that should be within a specific range, or a string that has a max length, you can specify that in the design resource as well. And what's really cool is it's not only for UI validation, we actually used it when the page is saved on the server side to validate that only valid values are specified here. So even if the page is saved over, let's say, tooling or metadata API, we have all that validation in place. And same there, I just want to point out the Lightning Component Developer Guide. We have updated the design doc with all the details, what you can do in the design resources. And then the other thing is we used the dynamic picklist feature where we provided an Apex data source that dynamically provided values that are automatically surfaced in a pick list. And same here, for example, here we handle if it's a lot of values, the pick list supports things like search autocomplete and things like that. So that's a very powerful feature that we have. And lastly, what I want you to also think about as you do this is to plan ahead a little bit. Because essentially, when you expose an attribute in the design resource, you make it part of your sort of component API or the shape of the component. So this is sort of the contract between your component and the page it's put on. And this is especially important if you're sharing your component, if you package it up or put it on App Exchange, because now you'll have pages out there assuming a certain shape of your component. So you can't go in and like change the meaning of an attribute or adding required attributes because that could break pages or existing pages using this component. So think about that and think about your design if you're exposing the component and how you want to evolve it.
Great. So we saw a lot of really good best practices there, everything from adding icons and labels to getting some great, nice, easy to understand and use properties there. With Lightning, we've been making just rapid developments. Each release has a lot of new functionality. And something that we delivered in the Winter 18 release is the ability to create your own custom page template. So I talked a little bit about templates at the beginning of this, and the templates are what kind of give you your base UX architecture. In my example, I had one header up on top, and I had 2 columns down below. And we got feedback that admins wanted to be able to have more options in there. So we did build a few more out in the spring release, but we got to a point where we said, okay, well, why don't we just open up, let's take advantage of our Lightning platform, and let's enable developers to build these out. So developers can now build Lightning components that will surface as custom page templates. They can be used for each one of those page cases, page use cases, so even the home page, which today we only ship one, developers can go out and they can build a variety of templates. You can define your own layout there. You can have multiple headers and all sorts of column variations. You can even have support in these templates for adaptive components. So one of the great things about the features, we've released it, is that we will pass width information into components. So components can react and adapt differently to the regions that they're in. So if you want them to behave one way in a narrow region and another way in a wide region, you'll have that level of control with this feature.
All right, so before we get into sort of a demo of how these templates are built, we spent a lot of time sort of exploring options and trying to figure out how we wanted to expose this feature. And in the end, we decided that the best way to expose this was to make it so you as developers didn't need to learn new technologies. And so we just made it so you can build a Lightning component and sort of with a certain, implementing a certain interface and such, you could just tell the system that your component is a template. So much like you do for exposing components to show up in the palette in the app builder, for templates, you implement one of the 3 interfaces that we've exposed. So we've got the Lightning Record Home template interface, which you would use if you wanted to build a template for record pages. And similarly, we've got interfaces for app pages and home pages. So depending on what template you want to build, you can implement the right interface. So here's sort of an example. We've got a really simple template here. You can see it implements Lightning Record Home template that essentially tells the system, like I mentioned before, that this is a template this is a component that needs to be used as a template for record pages. And once you're done with that, you would define a bunch of attributes for your component. Now you can see I've defined an attribute called region 1. It's important to note that in order to make sure that the system recognizes that this is an actual region on your template, you want to set the type to be Aura component array. This tells the system that this attribute expects a collection of components to be passed in, which is essentially what a region is, a collection of components that can be placed on the page. And once you're done defining all the regions as attributes, you can just go ahead and write the markup or the HTML for your template and place regions in there. Here, because it's a simple region, we've just wrapped it in a div. So this template is essentially just a simple one with a vertically stacked set of components. And again, much like you would do for components that you expose to be dragged onto the page, you have to specify some information on the design resource of the component. You'd start off with using the Flexipage template tag. This again tells the system that it is a template, and this helps us get some metadata that we can use when we show this template in the app builder. And within that, you need to go and specify all the different regions that you have sort of exposed. In this case, it's a simple region. It's a simple template. Like I mentioned, it's got a single region. The name is region 1. And then you also need to specify the default width. Now, the valid values for this are for small, medium, large, and extra large. And the reason you need to specify this is what gets passed into components that use the Lightning Flexipage region info component that I mentioned early on. And this is how the values get passed in from the template to the component. This way, the template author can say, you know what, this region is approximately medium in size, and that information can be accessed by component authors if they wish to and react to these values. So their component presents well within the template. So let's quickly switch to a sample template we built out. It's in the dev console. So there. So we wanted to build a template which had 3 regions, and the header, a main region, and we wanted to make sure that there was a collapsible sidebar, so components could be taken out of view when not needed. So you can see at the top, this component implements Lightning Record Home template. So this is a template for record home pages. In addition to that, we've also specified a description. This will show up in the app builder. We'll show you in a minute where exactly. And like I mentioned, we needed 3 regions, so we've specified 3 attributes: header, main, and collapsible sidebar. They're all of type Aura component array, so the system now knows that they're regions. And once that's done, we just went ahead and wrote the markup for this component. We've got the header showing up at the top, it's full width, and below that is a 2-column layout, 2/3 column called main, and there is a 1/3 column called collapsible sidebar, and like it says, it can be optionally collapsed. You can see we've got an anchor to collapse it if, when the user wants to. We've also added an SVG for this component, and that's again going to show up in the app builder. We'll show you where. And we've added the design file to expose information about this component. So you can see we've got the label specified, again, for use in the app builder. And we've got the Flexipage template tag specified along with the definitions for the 3 regions we have here. So it was as easy as that. And because it's a Lightning component, you've got all the other capabilities of Lightning components. You can add logic using your controller. You've got CSS. So it's something that you've been using, that you've been building for a while now. So hopefully it shouldn't be difficult to build templates. Let's switch to the app builder and see what this actually looks like. So like I mentioned, this was a template for record pages, so let's choose that option. Give this page a label. We're going to build a page for accounts. So in this screen, you can see at the top, there's a list of all the templates that we've shipped as a part of, as a part of the out-of-the-box experience from Salesforce. We currently ship about 8 templates. And right below that list, you can see all the custom templates in your org. So this is the template that we just built out. You can see the label shows up on the left, and then the SVG that we provided, and the description below that. So this way, you can make sure the admin knows what this template is going to do when they are picking one to build a new page. And that's all that's needed. You don't need to do anything more to make sure you can drop components in. We'll use the metadata that you provided in the design file and paint drop targets for you. And you can see it's as simple as that. So Christian's going to go ahead and build a real simple page here. And we can see that in action soon. So we want to drag the chatter feed onto the sidebar because a lot of times you just want to deal with the details or related lists, and you don't want the feed to take up any of the real estate that you have. So let's save and activate this page. And now when we switch back to Lightning Experience, you can see our template is in use over here. We've got the page that Christian just built out, and you can see the right sidebar is collapsible. If we don't need the feed, it can be taken out of view. So it was really simple to build a template that we don't ship as a part of the Salesforce, out of the box from Salesforce, but you can see this being very useful in different orgs. Now, while we're at that, we've got some guidelines in place for building templates as well, much like we have for components. So the first, and I think this is the most important one, is to keep it simple. Your template is really just responsible for the layout of the page. If possible, avoid adding a lot of logic to it. In most cases, logic really just belongs in your component that's sort of surfacing the data. The template really needs to be as thin as you can keep it, so it's reusable across different use cases. The next is around spacing. If you remember, I mentioned how we take care of injecting spacing between components, and that makes sure the UI is consistent. However, we don't do that for spacing between regions. And the reason we chose to do this is because we wanted to give you as developers full control over the layout. But that does mean that when you are designing these templates, it's important to make sure there's sufficient spacing between these regions, else components are just going to stick next to each other, and the page that gets built out of these templates are going to look less than ideal. So we recommend adding sufficient spacing between regions. And the last one is around displaying regions multiple times. Now, Lightning lets you define an attribute, and in this case, regions are attributes, and it lets you use these or render these attributes or regions multiple times within your markup. So it is possible as far as the framework is concerned, but we recommend you stay away from this. The reason is this will likely result in pretty confusing and broken behavior possibly in the app builder as well as in Lightning Experience. And to give an example of what I mean by displaying regions multiple times, we've got a template here. Again, it's pretty simple. It's got a single region. It's called region 1. But if you notice in the markup, we've actually used that twice. This is essentially telling the framework that you want to render the same region one below the other. And this will, in most cases, result in pretty unexpected behavior. We do warn you if this component is used in App Builder, you'll see a warning come up if the same region is used multiple times, but we won't prevent you from saving it because there are some cases where it might be valid, but in general, we recommend you stay away from doing this.
Thanks. Great. So what's coming beyond the Winter 18 release? So for developers, we want to introduce more capabilities for these components so that you can build better experiences for admins inside of the builder. So things we're looking into is supporting more data types for the properties that show up there on the right-hand side. Also exposing informational components. So if you go in and you go to a record page, you click on the highlights panel, which is one of the standard out-of-the-box components. There's a button in the properties that says see how it works. And that pops open a modal that gives a bit more information. That's something we haven't exposed for custom components yet, but something that we're working on and that we want to expose in the near term. Also looking into dependent picklist attributes and dependent attribute visibility. For templates, the features we're looking at are disabling click protection and scrollable regions and design time. So as you go in and you build your template, and let's say you have that collapsible functionality, in the Winter 18 release, you won't be able to actually collapse that as an admin inside of the app builder. What we're working on for the spring release is to be able to allow that. So the experience you have in the builder or in the design time is a little bit more WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get for the admin as they go and configure it. And with that, we'll jump into Q&A. Just want to mention one thing, that if you want to learn a bit more about this or see more of this functionality in action, You can come visit us downstairs at the Lightning App Builder My Lightning booth. It's actually staffed by the team that builds the app builder, so if you don't get a chance to ask your hard question here, please do take it downstairs and ask the team there. With that, we'll take questions.
Microphone.
Can you show an example of what you meant about the difference between the spacing between components and the spacing between regions?
Okay, sure. So if I switch to my component that I just built, you can see the CSS does not contain any rule to sort of say that there's supposed to be margins above or below it or paddings, right? But when we switch into, actually, let me edit this real quick and add that component on.
That's slow again.
Ooh, well, that's definitely broken there. You can see that there is some padding added between the two components over there, and this is added by the framework. We make sure that these don't stick to each other. When we talk about spacing between the regions on the template, it's essentially the spacing over here. And you've got the region, this is the header region that we have, and then there is some space before the two columns below that render. And this is specified in the template itself. So if we didn't have these rules in the CSS for our template, these two columns would just stick to the header, and yeah.
I see, but each region can hold more than one component.
Right.
Exactly. As template authors, you just need to worry about the spacing between the divs that contain your regions.
Okay.
As component authors, components that can get dragged on, you don't need to worry about spacing at all.
And if you want it the same as normal, is that specified what you should in the docs?
Same spacing.
So we use SLDS to specify the spacing, and so you can use one of the classes that's there in SLDS to make it consistent with the other templates.
Yep. There's another question there.
Yeah, the Magic Apex class that you extend so that you can give context to the pick list, does that have any context awareness, such as knowing that its component is now being used for S-object record page and that S-object belongs to the opportunity?
Yes. So it's there. We're just updating that in the dev docs. But the Apex class that you have gets passed in an object called the page context. And that page context contains the type of the page that's being edited, as well as if it's a record page, it will have the name of the object that's being built out.
Maybe called design context?
It's design context.
We missed it in the docs. I think we're updating it.
We'll have a doc update pretty soon.
Still, that's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Great question.
Yeah, we have some issues about the page rendering. So if I make any changes to the Lightning component, it takes me a couple of clicks to show up the changes on the Lightning page. Is it being resolved, or is there a way we can resolve that?
So you're saying you're in the dev console or in your development environment, you're pushing changes to the component itself, and it's taking a while for it to refresh in Lightning experience?
Even when I make a change to the Lightning component, like Lightning Page Builder, let's say I'm adding some component, it takes me like a couple of clicks more, like refreshes to get it loaded on the page. And also some of the roll-up fields, roll-up summary fields. When I try to add a material or something and it should actually update the numbers, it's not.
So we've been trying our best to make sure that when you make changes, we sort of clear out some of the caches so it shows up immediately. But we have heard certain cases where the cache has been, let's say, a little too
aggressive.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, we have a launch in January, and it's kind of an issue for us because users don't see that when they add something, they want it updated real time. And it's not like they have to go refresh the page twice to see that it's actually been added to the, the record has actually been created.
Okay, we can follow up
So-
offline and see if we can
Sure.
get some more information, maybe even get an investigation or something.
Can I meet you guys?
Yeah,
downstairs?
that's fine. Yeah,
Thank
let's
you,
get another
guys.
question in.
Sure.
Yep.
All right. My question's about, like, the example, for example, you had with the property earlier. One of the things I've ran into, and it seems to me like a missing part of all this, is like an app builder event manager to be able to say, okay, that property, let's say I have another generic component that provides a list of events, and I want it to fire off like a component event, and I want that to fill in that property dynamically. And I kind of was looking for something to do that, to be able to use App Builder as the mechanism to build a bunch of generic components and link them together, and without using the application events, which seem to be to me a bad design way to do it.
Yes.
And the only way I can find to do it is building like a Lightning app and a standalone one-page component myself that was just a one big page component, and dropping the one component in there to do it. And I was wondering whether there's anything I missed, or whether that's something coming down the road, or.
It's definitely something I keep hearing a lot from customers, and it's also something that I've been wanting to build. So maybe Michael, product manager.
So it's something that we've been talking about internally to how to solve. So it would be great. Maybe we can chat afterwards, and I get some of your use cases of some of the events you want to be able to surface in there, and then we can figure out.
To answer the question, no, you're not missing anything.
Yeah, you're not missing anything. It's not supported today, right? But it's something we need to build. Yeah.